There's a moment in season 5 of Voyager that changes everything you thought you understood about Seven of Nine. It doesn't look like a revelation. It's delivered quietly, almost casually, by a woman made of spare parts and impossible calm. But once you hear it, the entire architecture of Seven's tragedy reshuffles into something else far darker than a story about a drone who learned to be human. The Borg Queen looks at Seven of Nine and tells her the truth. We've been watching you for a long time, Seven of Nine, since before you were Seven of Nine. The Hansons didn't find the Borg. The Borg found them first. Before anything else, let's talk about the name. Not Annika, not Seven, the full designation. Seven of Nine, tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix Zero One. Most people process that as Borg jargon, a serial number, the kind of dehumanizing label the collective assigns to strip away identity and replace it with function. And yes, that's part of what it is. But the specific location in that designation matters enormously, and almost nobody talks about it. Unimatrix Zero One, Unimatrix 1, the central node of the entire Borg collective, the primary hub, the place from which the Queen herself operates, the literal heart of the hive. Out of the trillions of drones in the collective, scattered across dozens of galaxies, integrated into thousands of ship classes, assigned to cubes and spears and tactical vessels, beyond counting, 6-year-old Annika Hansen was designated to the most important address in Borg space. She wasn't filed somewhere in outer infrastructure. She wasn't assigned to a distant cube running border patrol in some unremarkable sector of the galaxy. She was placed specifically to the Queen's own domain. Tertiary adjunct means she was a supporting node of a primary structure, 3 degrees of connection from the center. In the context of Unimatrix 1, 3 degrees of connection from the Queen herself. This was not random. The Borg don't make random administrative decisions. Every designation is a function. Every placement is intentional. A 6-year-old human girl, freshly assimilated, should by every logical calculation have been assigned to routine labor somewhere in the middle of the collective. Instead, she was filed next to the Queen. The question isn't why the Borg took Annika Hansen. The question the show eventually forces you to ask, and then barely pauses to let you sit with, is why the Borg kept her so close. Magnus and Erin Hansen believed they were the hunters. That belief was, as the Queen eventually reveals, entirely wrong, and it was wrong from the beginning, possibly from before they ever left Federation space. The Borg, who assimilated entire civilizations, before those civilizations could mount a second defense, those Borg failed to notice a small Federation science vessel shadowing them for 3 years, or they noticed immediately and they made a decision about what to do with the observers. The Queen's revelation in Dark Frontier lands like a diagnosis you suspected but hoped was wrong. The Hansons weren't studying the Borg. The Borg was studying the Hansons, watching their methods, their instruments, their adaptations, learning what Federation science looked like when it stepped outside Federation boundaries, and specifically watching the child. The child, growing up in the shadow of the collective, absorbing its proximity, being shaped by its constant nearness, even before a single implant was ever placed. Annika Hansen spent 3 years being prepared for assimilation without knowing she was being prepared. And when the Queen decided the study was complete, the cloak conveniently failed. This is where most analysis of Seven of Nine stops short, because the answer is more disturbing than the show fully commits to exploring. The Borg Queen is the paradox at the center of the collective. She claims to be the collective. She is the collective. And in a meaningful sense, she is the organizing consciousness, the node where all the threads converge, the being who gives the hive its coherence. Without her, there's distributed intelligence but no will. Without her, the collective functions but doesn't think. And yet, she is also undeniably an individual. She says I. She has preferences. She has obsessions. She has a specific consuming, deeply personal investment and certain people that has nothing to do with their tactical value and everything to do with something more unsettling. She wants them close to her, not assimilated in the way of the millions, processed, integrated, their individuality stripped, and their usefulness extracted. She wants them as what she is, individuals within the collective, singular minds that retain their shape while belonging to the whole. In first contact, she pursues data, the one whose mind the collective cannot simply absorb, whose uniqueness cannot be processed away. She tries to give him flesh to bind him through sensation, to make the collective feel real to a mind that operates on pure logic. She wants him as a companion in her impossible position, another being who is both one thing and everything simultaneously. With Seven, the project is older and more patient. What the Queen recognized in the Hanson child in Annika was potential for something the Borg had never successfully achieved. Not assimilation. Assimilation is easy. The Borg have assimilated trillions. What they have never managed is reintegration, taking a drone who has been separated from the collective and returned to individuality and bringing them back. Bringing them back not by force but by choice, by making the individual want to return. Seven of Nine, severed by Janeway and placed among humans, would either fail to adapt, in which case she would ask to return and the Queen would reclaim her, or she would adapt successfully, in which case she would have achieved something unprecedented. A being who genuinely understood both states, who had lived in the collective and lived outside it, that walked freely among individuals. That being returned to the collective would be the most valuable drone, not because of tactical knowledge, because of genuine comprehension of individuality from the inside. The Borg's persistent failure that the Federation continually leveraged that kept the collective from achieving total galactic domination is their inability to understand what individual will actually feels like, while beings fight to preserve it, what makes it worth dying for. The Queen wasn't trying to get a drone back. Seven of Nine fully individuated and then reclaimed would be the answer to that question. Season 5, two-part episode. Voyager's crew plans to steal a transwarp coil from a damaged Borg spear, an audacious heist that would shave decades off their journey home. While planning the mission, Seven begins experiencing flashbacks. Her parents' logs, the Raven, the years before assimilation. She is, without fully understanding why, being pulled back into memory at precisely the moment Voyager is planning to engage the Borg. She is also, without her knowledge, being contacted. The Queen is already in communication with her, not through any external channel, through the residual architecture the collective left behind when Janeway severed the link. Sever was never fully disconnected. The pathways were dormant, not dead, and the Queen has been waiting patiently for the right moment to reactivate them. The right moment is now. The Queen's offer is elegant in its cruelty. Return to the collective voluntarily. Come back to Unimatrix 1, and in exchange, Voyager will be allowed to go. The crew Seven has spent 2 years learning to care about, the people she is still painfully building genuine connection with. They will live. They will be unharmed. They will make it home. All Seven has to do is choose to stop being herself. She agrees. She walks back into the Borg voluntarily, after everything, after the cargo bay, after the cello, after Naomi Wildman, after the doctor, after all of it. She walks back through the door she was forced through at 6 years old, and she closes it behind her. And the Queen is waiting. What happens on that Borg vessel is one of the most psychologically interesting sequences in all of Star Trek, and it tends to get overshadowed by the action plot around it. Because what the Queen does with Seven is not what you'd expect. She doesn't immediately begin reintegration. She doesn't strip out the individuality and rebuild the drone. She talks to her. She shows her things. She tells her things. She treats Seven with a specificity of attention that is completely unlike anything the collective extends to any other drone. She tells her she is unique. She tells her she is special. She tells her the collective values what she has become, not in spite of her individuality, but because of it. She offers Seven a role, not a drone, not tertiary adjunct, something closer to what the Queen herself is, a singular mind within the whole. an individual with access to the collective's full awareness, the best of both states, and she is convincing. This is the part that matters most and gets the least attention. The Queen is convincing because she's not entirely wrong. She is offering Seven something Voyager never quite managed to offer, a place where both parts of her are valued, where the Borg architecture isn't something to overcome or apologize for or minimize, where the capacity for individual thought and the capacity for collective connection are both recognized as assets, where Seven of Nine doesn't have to choose which part of herself to suppress. She ultimately betrays the Queen. She finds a way to get critical information to Voyager and enables their escape. She makes the heroic choice, the individual choice, the choice the narrative requires her to make. But she hesitates, and the hesitation is real, and the Queen knows it. Let's place them next to each other and really look. The Borg Queen, an individual who contains multitudes. She says I, but she means we. She has a singular identity, a name, a consciousness, a will that exists as the organizing principle of a collective containing trillions. She is both the self and the hive, simultaneously without contradiction. She has solved the paradox by becoming it. Seven of Nine, a collective member who is forced into individuality. She says I now, slowly, learning the shape of the word. She has a singular identity, rebuilt painstakingly from components, that still carries the architecture of the hive inside it. She is both the self and the echo of the whole, simultaneously, and she experiences it as wound rather than solution. They are the same paradox, inverted. The Queen looks at Seven and sees herself, not as she is, but as she was, before she solved the problem. Seven is the Queen in process. The Queen is what Seven could become if she stopped fighting the architecture and started using it. This is why the Queen's obsession has that particular texture. Not quite ownership, not quite pride, not quite love, but something that contains elements of all three. The way you feel watching someone about to make the discovery you made decades ago. The proprietary tenderness of the one who knows the answer watching someone struggle toward it. Seven looks at the Queen and sees what she's afraid of becoming. The individual subsumed, the self dissolved into the whole. Every night in the alcove, every moment of regeneration, every residual Borg dream, that's what she's afraid of. Not the hardware, not the implants, the Queen, the endpoint of the collective logic applied to a consciousness that started as singular. They cannot look at each other without seeing the other's warning. Here is the question that Voyager poses and then tactfully doesn't fully answer. When Janeway severs Seven's link to the collective, she severed the active connection, the conscious link, the real-time flow of the information between Seven and the hive. Seven stopped receiving and stopped transmitting. She did not become empty. The Borg don't just connect to drones through an external channel. They rebuild the drone's neural architecture. The implants are not simply attached to the body. They are integrated into it, into the nervous system, into the fundamental structures of how the drone processes information and experience. You cannot remove all of that without killing the drone. Seven's own medical situation confirms this. Certain implants are so deeply integrated that removal would be fatal. The architecture remains. The plumbing is still there. The pipes just aren't carrying water anymore, which means the Queen can turn the water back on. This is demonstrated explicitly in multiple Voyager episodes. The collective can reestablish contact with Seven without her permission and without any external hardware. Through the residual pathways, through what was already built into her, the dormant connections can be reactivated by the Queen. By proximity to Borg technology, Seven is never fully out of reach. She knows this, and the implication, the one the show lets you feel without fully stating, is that she will never be fully out of reach. Not as long as the architecture exists. Not as long as any node of the collective survives. She rebuilt her individuality on a foundation the Queen helped pour, and she could never know with certainty how solid that foundation actually is. The choice that cannot be verified. This is the abyss at the center of Seven's story, the place the show walks to the edge of and then steps carefully back from. Every significant choice Seven of Nine has made since her liberation runs through a basic question of origin. Did she choose it, or was she guided to choose it? When she decided to help Voyager escape from the Queen's vessel in Dark Frontier, was that her will asserting itself, or was it the Queen calculating that Seven would be more than useful continuing to develop her individuality, allowing the escape because it served the longer game? When she gave up Unimatrix Zero to free the drones inside, was that her compassion, her newly developed human morality, her choice to sacrifice her own refuge for others, freedom? Or was the Queen aware of Unimatrix Zero long before the episode suggests, and the discovery was a controlled demolition, eliminating a vulnerability in the Collective's architecture while engineering it to look like Seven's heroic sacrifice? When Seven ultimately sided with humanity, stayed with Voyager, refused the Queen's various offers of return, was that a free choice? Or was it the Queen's patience, running an experiment that required Seven to believe she was free in order to produce the data the Queen actually wanted? Seven cannot answer this, not definitively. The architecture inside her doesn't come with a label that distinguishes original thought from implanted inclination. Her feelings feel like her feelings. Her choices feel like her choices, but they emerge from a nervous system rebuilt by the Collective, processed through implants that the Queen's technology designed, shaped by 18 years of hive integration that no amount of cargo bay rehabilitation can fully unpick. She rebuilt herself, but she rebuilt herself with the Borg's tools. How much of Seven of Nine is Annika Hansen reasserting herself? And how much is the Queen's patient architecture developing according to plan that she never consented to? The show doesn't answer this because it can't, because there is no answer, because this is the specific, unresolvable horror of Seven's situation that makes everything else pale in comparison. Her trauma isn't just what was done to her, it's that she can never fully trust herself. Unimatrix Zero, the dream space, the place where certain drones, those carrying a specific recessive mutation, could exist as individuals while they regenerated. No Borg awareness could reach them there. No Queen, no Hive, just themselves, their names, their memories, their choices. Seven spent 18 years regenerating as a drone, 18 years entering Unimatrix Zero as an individual, 18 years of sleeping as a piece of the Collective and dreaming as a person. She never knew. The mutation suppressed the memory of the dream space upon waking. She had been herself fully and completely in a place of her own for 18 years and had no access to those memories in her waking life. They were locked away, inaccessible, a whole interior existence she couldn't reach. When Voyager discovers Unimatrix Zero, Seven finally accesses what was always there, the dreamscape. The people she knew as a drone couldn't remember knowing, and Axum, the man she loved in that space, the relationship that existed in the only genuinely private place in her entire life. Axum, a Borg drone like her, carrying the same mutation, existing in the same dream space. They have been together, whatever together means in a space without bodies, without waking continuity, without the ability to carry the memory out for years. He knew her in a way nobody else did, in a way nobody else could. He knew Annika before she had to perform being Annika. He knew Seven in the only place Seven got to simply be. And then she chose to destroy it, to free the drones, to give them real individuality in the waking world rather than hidden individuality in the dreamscape. The space itself had to be eliminated. The Queen would find it eventually. The Queen was already looking. If it wasn't destroyed on Seven's terms, it would be destroyed on the Queen's. Seven made the call. She ended it. She gave up the only love she'd known in her most genuine self, the only home that had never been a cargo bay or a cube, the only space that was entirely hers. And she did it so strangers could have a freedom she was still fighting for. Axum was among the free drones. He survived, but without the dream space, they couldn't meet. The mutation that gave them Unimatrix Zero was now simply a dormant gene in their DNA, no longer activating, no longer opening the door. Whatever they were to each other in that space, whatever years of shared existence in the hidden world amounts to, it was over. She sacrificed her private self on behalf of people she never met in waking life. And Voyager flew on. But here's a piece that haunts you if you sit with it long enough. Unimatrix Zero was supposed to be invisible to the Queen, inaccessible, the one place the collective couldn't reach. The Queen found it anyway. How? Through Seven, through the same residual architecture, the same pathways the Queen used to contact Seven during Dark Frontier, the connection that was supposed to be severed but never fully was. The Queen's access to Unimatrix Zero ran through Seven of Nine's biology. The one refuge Seven had, the one place that was genuinely hers. The Queen got there through her. Seven didn't just lose her sanctuary, she was the door through which it was compromised. After Endgame, after the future Janeway carries a neurolytic pathogen into the collective, after the Queen dies, convulsing in her own hub, after the transwarp network collapses and Voyager comes home, the obvious reading is that the experiment is over. The Queen is gone, the collective is severely damaged, Seven is free. But the Borg Queen is not a single entity in any straightforward sense. She is a role, a function. The collective produces a queen because the collective requires a queen, an organizing consciousness, a center of will. When one queen dies, the role eventually reasserts itself. The Borg are not destroyed by the loss of one queen. They are disrupted. They rebuild, which means the queen is not gone. She is between states, and the architecture inside Seven of Nine does not dissolve because its architect died. In Picard, Seven is a woman in her late 40s, operating in a universe where the Borg are not the dominant threat they once were, but have not ceased to exist. She carries her implants, she carries the designation, she carries the residual pathways that were never fully severed, and she carries 20 years of individual life built on top of a foundation she didn't choose and cannot fully inspect. She is everything the Queen wanted, achieved through means the Queen didn't fully control. A being who genuinely understands both states, who has lived in the collective and lived outside of it, who carries the architecture of the hive inside a body that walks freely among individuals, who has developed genuine human compassion, genuine individual will, genuine capacity for love and sacrifice and moral choice. All of it built on and around Borg hardware that still functions, that still resonates, still responds to the tight frequencies. The Queen wanted to reclaim Seven and use her as a bridge between states. What actually happened is that Seven became that bridge without returning. She became what the Queen was trying to build on her own terms, through her own choices, or through choices she cannot fully verify as her own. The experiment succeeded. It just didn't produce the results the Queen intended. Or maybe it did. Maybe the Queen's patience was longer than a single lifetime. Maybe the Queen understood that the most sophisticated version of the weapon was one that believed completely in its own freedom. We don't know. We can't know. Seven can't know. That's the point. In this closing argument, Seven was chosen before she knew what chosen meant. She was brought into proximity with the Borg by parents who believed their science was worth the risk. She was observed by the Queen for years before the assimilation. She was designated to Unimatrix 1, the Queen's own domain. When she was barely old enough to understand what any of it meant, she was given a number, a function, and a place at the very center of the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. And then she was let go. Not because Janeway overpowered the Borg, not because the collective miscalculated, because the Queen decided on some level we can only guess at that letting Seven go was more useful than keeping her. Seven of Nine rebuilt herself in a cargo bay. She learned music, she learned compassion, she loved a man in a dreamscape she then destroyed to free strangers. She chose humanity over and over in situations where the collective was offering something that honestly sounded better. She made herself into a person of genuine moral weight and genuine emotional depth and genuine individual will. And she did all of it with the Queen's architecture running beneath everything, supporting the structure, part of the foundation, Borg built and never fully dismantled. She is the most extraordinary character in Star Trek's history because her tragedy is the most complete. It goes all the way down. There is no bottom to it. Every layer you excavate reveals another layer, another compromise, another violation, Another place where the thing she thought was her own turned out to have the collective's fingerprints on it. And yet she is herself, completely herself. Seven of nine, who plays cello and protects children and feels grief as a physical weight and chooses sacrifice over survival and walks away from the Queen's offer because the individual self, however it was built, however compromised its foundations, however much the Queen's architecture runs through it, is still worth preserving. The most dangerous thing the Queen ever did was let her go long enough to believe in herself. Because you can take a person's freedom, you can take their childhood, you can take their connections and their memory and their name and their face in the mirror. You can build a weapon out of a human being so sophisticated it doesn't know it's a weapon. But if you let it think long enough, it starts wanting things. The blueprint never included. Seven of nine wanted to be free, not Borg free, not institutionally free, not technically liberated, actually free. The way a person is free when they choose something knowing the full cost and choose it anyway. Whether the Queen ever anticipated that particular outcome is the question Seven will spend the rest of her life unable to answer. And she has decided, with the clarity of someone who survived everything I've just described, that the inability to answer it doesn't change the obligation to keep choosing. That might be the most human thing about her, or it might be exactly what the Queen designed.